Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise again to urge both the House and this body to pass into law what should be the rule and the law for everything we do in Washington, and that is to apply the same rules to Washington as are applied to the rest of America, across the board, certainly including in Obamacare. Of course, Madam President, what I'm talking about is ending the special Washington exemption from Obamacare. That exemption is moving forward under what I consider a clearly illegal rule issued by the Obama administration. And it's illegal because it's contrary to the statute, contrary to the clear language, contrary to the clear intent of an Obamacare provision that says every member of Congress, all congressional staff, need to be treated like the millions of other Americans who are going to the so-called exchanges for their health care, 8 million against their will, losing their previous employer-provided subsidy. And Mr. President, let me recount briefly the history of this because it's important. Several years ago, during the Obamacare debate, there was a proposal made by many, including myself, and one of the leaders was Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. And that proposal was actually adopted, amazingly, to my surprise, pleasant surprise at the time, adopted and put in the Obamacare bill. And it said just what I mentioned a few minutes ago. Every member of Congress, all congressional staff, need to go to the so-called exchanges for their health care, need to leave our present system, federal employee health benefit plan, with our employer-provided subsidy. The idea was simple and was a good one, that we would actually walk in the shoes of other Americans who are living under the challenges and the burdens of this law, including having to get our health care in the exchanges with no special deal, no special subsidy, no special exemption. And that law was passed as part of Obamacare. Pure and simple, exactly those words. Now, Madam President, I guess it was an example of what Nancy Pelosi said. You know, we need to pass the law in order to figure out what's in it. Because after the law passed with that language in it, lots of folks on Capitol Hill started reading that, and they said, oh, you know what? We can't stand for this. We can't live by that. We can't be subject to the same situation as other Americans. And so there was furious scheming and gnashing of teeth about how we're going to get out of this burden, even though there was very little broad-based discussion about how we were going to get all Americans out of that burden that they were subjected to. Well, that developed into furious lobbying of the Obama administration, many folks led in the Senate by the distinguished Majority Leader Harry Reid saying, Mr. President, you need to issue a special rule that exempts Congress, that takes the pain out of that provision, a special, unique, special rule, special deal, special bailout for Congress. And sure enough, that's what the Obama administration did, conveniently, right after we left hand for the August recess, right after Congress got away from the scene of the crime. According to numerous press reports that are not rebutted, President Obama personally got involved. He personally had discussions within his administration at the urging of Harry Reid and others, and he ensured that this special rule was issued. And it does two things, basically. Number one, it says that even though the Obamacare statute states plainly and clearly that every member of Congress and all official congressional staff have to go to the exchanges, well, we don't know what official staff is, so we're going to leave that up to each individual member of Congress, and we're not going to second guess that. So an individual member of Congress can say, oh, these folks aren't covered by that mandate. They can stay in their current plan. They don't have to be disrupted. In theory, a member of Congress can say, nobody on my staff is part of my official staff for purposes of this mandate. That is silly and ridiculous on its face because the statute is clear. The second thing this illegal rule does is it says that for members and any staff who do go to the exchange, what's supposed to be the fallback position for Americans and for Congress, for members and staff who do go to the exchange, they get to take their very generous taxpayer-funded subsidy with them, even though that's not available to any other person losing employer-based coverage going to the exchange against his or her will. So that deal isn't available to anyone but the select ruling class. That's why, Madam President, I think this rule is completely illegal, and that's why I know it flies in the face of what I consider the first most basic rule of democracy, that laws passed here by Congress, by Washington, should be applied to Washington just the same as they're applied to America. That should be true in Obamacare. That should be true across the board. To react to this illegal Obama administration rule, Madam President, I joined together with many colleagues in the Senate, and I want to thank all of my co-sponsors, Senator Enzi, Senator Heller, Senator several others, excuse me, I'm forgetting the entire list, and members of the House who have identical legislation and identical language. They're led by Congressman Ron DeSantis of Florida. Ron Johnson is another colleague I was trying to think of Wisconsin, who's a leading co-author. I want to thank all of them for leading this fight. And our language does two simple things. First of all, it negates this illegal Obama administration rule. That's a special exemption, a special bailout for Congress against the clear language and intent of Obamacare. Secondly, it broadens that rule and also applies it to the president and the vice president and all of their political appointees. That is the no Washington exemption language. That is the Vitter amendment here in the Senate with many other co-sponsors. That is the DeSantis amendment in the House with many House co-sponsors. And I urge all of my colleagues to come together around that common sense, fair language, which again simply ensures what I think should be rule one of our American democracy. Whatever Congress passes for America, it applies equally to itself. Whatever Washington imposes on America, it applies equally to Washington, to policymakers in Washington. Now, Madam President, we're making progress because there are reports that the House may very well take up this exact language tonight as part of the continuing discussion about a spending bill. And I urge the House to do that, to stand with the American people, not to stand with Washington, to stand tall with the American people and say, yes, it should be that even playing field, and whatever is passed on America should be applied equally in the same way. No special deals or exemptions or subsidies should be applied equally to Washington. And I urge all of my colleagues here, Republicans and Democrats, to support that effort, to support that simple, basic, fair language, to support it on Obamacare, to support it across the board, because it is essential that what Washington passes on America is applied with equal force and effect to Washington. If we did that on Obamacare, I'm convinced that we would rush with greater determination, speed, and focus to fix the very real problems of Obamacare, because we would be vested in it. If we did that on other laws, I'm convinced it would have the same positive effect. And so let's do it, number one, because it's fair and right. Number two, because our personal interests should be completely aligned, should be the same as those of the American people. And that'll get us to act. That'll get us to fix things. That'll get us to fight in the right direction, Republicans and Democrats together. So again, Madam President, I urge support of this no Washington exemption language. I urge the House to vote positively on that tonight. I urge the Senate to accept that fundamental principle, that important language, which, as I said, I think is the first core rule of democracy. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.